which is something I should have known but didn't. So yeah, I'm just terrible for the time zones, basically. Yeah. Anyway, welcome everybody. We are live, folks, back with you. It's Brainfood Live on Air, episode 107, bringing it to you every Friday. And super excited to be chatting with you all today. It's been a super popular topic. Loads of people have been talking about this, and we had to bring it to the Brainfood audience. Post-pandemic employer retention crisis, employee retention crisis. Are we kind of all on tenterhooks and expecting a tsunami of resignations as people start needing to come back to the office or losing government support and what have you? So we're going to be exploring that with some really smart individuals in the show later today. Anyway, before we kick off, just a quick one in terms of sound checking, as we always do. I can see there's a bunch of people already here on Crowdcast. So if you can hear me on Crowdcast, okay, please let me know. If you can hear me okay, give me a hello on there. We are multicasting, folks. I think we should be live on LinkedIn. On my LinkedIn Live, I believe we are. If so, give me a thumbs up or give me one of those reactions. You can have like weird reactions on LinkedIn, can't you? Where it's like, yeah, you've caused me to think, stuff like this. It's not just thumbs up, thumbs down. There's actually specific things on LinkedIn that says, yeah, I dispute that, but in a polite way. So give me one of those, please, LinkedIn. And we are broadcasting on the Facebook group, I think. So we should be there. We should be live. I think there's 3 people watching it there, which is amazing. If you can hear me okay, give me a thumbs up there. Okay, we're getting a few people saying they can hear us fine, which is great. Okay, a quick word to our sponsors. Our sponsors this week are Kelly Services, folks. Kelly Services, you should know who they are. One of the biggest, if not the biggest, staffing consultancy worldwide. I think any kind of major enterprise-wide challenge you have when it comes to recruiting or managing your staff, Kelly Services in the room talking about it. And you should check them out. I've just shared their link in the chat stream there if you're in that boat. And one of the things that they need to do today is actually supply some labor to us because as a price for their sponsorship, one of the things I needed to do is to get Rich Bradley on, the MD of UK and Ireland, I believe, unless your title has changed recently, Rich, I don't know. But welcome to the show, man. Good to see you again.
Yeah, thanks very much. The only way I can get on air is to pay for it, Hung. So, yeah, it's good to be here. Thanks. Good to be here.
Fantastic. And great to have your insight as well, Rich. I think you were initially going to be like one of the guests on the show here because obviously you can say a lot from the perspective of a big supplier like Kelly's. So we'll dive into that, and I fully want to hear your perspective on this matter as well. Before we kick off, though, we always do a quick review of the newsletter from last week. So let's run through that real quick, Rich. Did you read it? And if so, what was interesting for you?
I always read it. I get it twice on a Sunday, so I always get excited and realise it's the same content. But the content's always great, mate. And the thing I genuinely love is there's some really thought-provoking stuff out there. And I think a couple of bits that really caught my eye this week was, firstly, there's a really interesting podcast by Katja Adler on the BBC, all about the future of work. I found it quite interesting because it wasn't the usual suspects. There were a lot of economists, few politicians. So I'm always interested to hear how they spin things. But it was a really fascinating uptake on what the world of future of work looks like. So well worth a look, well worth a listen.
I was interested in that for exactly the same reasons, Rich, because it's not just talking heads in industry. It's actually people from different parts of the world. As you say, politicians, like they're going to matter when it comes down to what they think the future work is because they're rolling out legislation that's going to impact it. So I thought and also a global one as well, weren't they? Because they went to different places, went to Chile, they went to, different countries. It wasn't just the US or UK, which can be over dominant sometimes in the discourse. So it was great to just tap into different voices, different parts of the world. Share it in chat room there, folks. Give it a listen. Only 30 minutes, I think. Okay, what else, Rich?
There are a couple of others that I really liked. One that's really, really prevalent today was about how to do hybrid right, which was the Harvard Business Review, which was the focusing on a flexible workforce, agile working. And I think the bit that I really, really resonated with me to sum up what I thought was a really good article was focus on individual human concerns, not just institutional ones. And that was a really interesting, relatively short insight into that flexible, agile working.
Yeah, I just shared it in the chat stream again there, folks. HBR obviously produce some great content. Sometimes it can vary though, because every business goes a little bit clickbaity. But this one was really good. I think they actually gave you a framework for this. So they don't look at hybrid with an overly optimistic, it's going to be the magical solution to all of our concerns. This happy place where we can have best of both worlds. It recognizes the inherent challenges in hybrid, and then it says, here's a couple of things you can do about it as a manager. So essential reading, folks. One more, Rich, before we dive into it.
Yeah, the other one I found was really interesting was the U-shaped crisis. I mean, it's produced by the Resolution Foundation, and I think the content that those guys produce is always absolutely top drawer. It's pretty heavy. It's a proper impact, really in depth, but the general fact was that quite rightly so, we're focusing on the impact to young people and youth due to the pandemic, but there was also a significant impact to those age 50 plus, and being 50 this year, it kind of resonated, but was very much talking about the length of time it took people over the age of 50 to get back into the workforce and the challenges it produced around reskilling. Really in depth, but fascinating read.
Yeah, I mean, I thought I'd put that right at the top, Rich, because I'm also getting older. I mean, I looked at my hairline the other day. I thought, holy crap, I was super confident in my hair, right? Because I'm thinking, yeah, I got these thick black Asian hairs. There's no way I'm going bald, bro. I'm going bald.
I had that same problem about 19, mate. I was all there, big quiff, still loving the Smiths, thought everything was okay. Then it was gone.
You met the crisis early though, Richard, and you managed to rebuild your identity like really early on. Whereas I've now got to wrestle with it. So I'm just going to head into this crisis. But I read this thing and on the U-shaped crisis, and I thought this is really prevalent because you and I, we both have friends. We all have friends, don't we? They're on the market involuntarily right now. These may be managers, people 45, 50, that type of age range. They're really struggling sometimes to get back in because there is a perception that you want to get younger as a business. There's IBM famously a couple of years ago. We had a big kind of clear out of existing staff. They're also more expensive. So if you've hit the 45, 50 year kind of age range, you're actually probably one of the higher earners as an employee in a business. So when you pop out and you're on the market again, you're actually quite an expensive person for a business to hire. And would it not make more sense for that person to try and maybe degrade the role somewhat and hire someone younger in their career? And final issue, which I think is critically important, the shift to remote is in many respects a shift to digitization also, which means that there is a perception, true or not, valid or not, that the younger person is going to be more natively in tune to this than anything else. So does the remote working world really have created additional barrier to the older worker, which you and I are kind of fully fledged members of, right? Yeah. So very important. Everyone's going to be there as well, folks. So, if it's not your problem now, it will be at some point. We need to think about it. So please do read that post. It's a digestible report. It's about 70 pages. But it is something you can browse over. Do take a read because I think it gives us some food for thought as to what we as recruiters and HR people can do about it. Okay, fine. Let's move on to the topic at hand, Rich. We're talking this idea of talking about post-pandemic employee retention really came to me after just reading a few articles that seem to just increase in frequency. Like people are kind of concerned, employers are kind of concerned to say, you know what, when we do switch the lights back on, so to speak, and we start moving people back to work, back to office, etc., we're going to get this tsunami of people resigning from us because, the expectations have changed from the candidate and the employer side. What's your view of that, sitting where you're at with Kelly Services, Richard?
Yeah, look, I think it is going to be a problem, and I think it's going to be a problem on a number of different levels, not just for Kelly as an organisation, but looking at all of those people that we support and service. And I think there's a misconception that it's just about how you treated people during COVID. And I think there is a big important part, and there are a lot of organisations that have not particularly covered themselves in glory during that period of time, and I think they've got some challenges coming. But I read an article very recently which was, unlike times before, people are just tired, and they're tired because of the whole way of things have changed. And actually, are people just going to move, even if they're motivated and they like where they are? Is a change as good as a rest? So I think there's some stuff that we can legislate for, and I think there's some stuff that we can start to see. But I think organisations are genuinely concerned. And I think there's a bit around that technical skill, and it comes back as well before, which is not just can we hire the right technical ability, but can we hire some of those softer skills and be able to bring people in with the right level of gravitas to influence, because there's the whole way of working now is going to change, and we need different skills coming into that workplace. So not only hiring, but how do we move that stuff? So stuff like internal mobility is coming onto the radar. It's going to be an interesting roller coaster ride the next 12 to 18 months, I think.
It is. I think calling it a roller coaster is quite right, Rich, because we've had like this shocking decline and upwards. It's going to be as chaotic going forward next 12 months because, as you say, everyone recognizes we're in this period of change now, and the future isn't set. We're still having the debate what format of remote it is. Is it going to be hybrid? Is it going to be full on premise? That's going to play out over the 12, 18 months. No question, that's going to have huge impact in terms of, what kinds of people are most suited to do that type of work within your business. So I want to bring our guests on first to talk about, number one, is this a problem and how do they know that? And then number two, let's see, what are we going to do about it? What does that mean for businesses in particular? So let's bring our guests on here, Rich. We've got some old friends here, industry figures, I think, going to be very familiar to a lot of us. Yeah. So let's try and get this one right. Okay, let's bring on Mel first. I'll bring them all on together because there's going to be three of sort of all five of us on screen, probably the right thing to try and do. Let's give this a shot. Hopefully Crowdcast can manage it. And I think that's Liz. It could be Liz. You know what? There's always two Liz's. And I might have invited the wrong Liz. But
you'd be welcome anyway.
Absolutely. I'm totally up for it. There's Mel. How are you doing, Mel? Good to see you.
I'm good. Good to see you.
Great.
Figured out the technology.
Indeed. Is that Liz Dowling?
It is.
Liz, how are you doing? I got the right Liz. Amazing. And Merv, I've just invited you, man. So you just got to click accept and you should come on. Okay.
I did.
Are you there, Merv?
Can you hear me?
I can see you. Yeah. I see you. Hang on. I can hear him, but not see him on screen. Can you see him?
I have a triple problem this morning. My camera won't work. I've lost my AirPods, and the builders are erecting scaffolding right outside the room I was sitting in. So I've moved into another room. But right. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Right. Okay. Well, I think we can hear you as a disembodied voice, Mervyn. I wish we had a clippy type figure that could represent you in some way. But unfortunately we don't. But stay with us if you're okay with it, Mervyn.
So very happy.
And then
it's Friday the 13th.
Absolutely. I'll keep you there. Okay, let's do some intros firstly. Go with you first, Mel. For the people who don't know you, can you quickly introduce yourself, who you are, what it is you do?
Yeah, brilliant. So Melanie Hayes, I am the Chief People Officer at the Harvey Nash Group. So Harvey Nash Group is a technology recruiting business and also a technology IT outsourcing business. So we have two brands, Nash Tech and Crimson, that sit in that category.
Great stuff. Harvey Nash, of course, super well-known name in our business. And Liz, quickly introduce yourself, who you are, and what it is you do.
Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Dowling. I'm Head of People for View, and we are a global programmatic out-of-home marketplace. So we make it very easy for people to trade and buy media.
Fantastic. And Mervyn, disembodied Merv, who are you and what it is you do?
The voice in the dark. I'm a writer, researcher. I collaborate primarily with HR and recruitment tech companies to research the market trends, to write about them in reports. And I'm co-author of one book, Exceptional Talent, and the forthcoming book, Digital Talent. That's me.
Fantastic. Let's stay with you, Mervyn, on this, because you mentioned you've done the research and this is your job now. So let's go to you immediately. The opening premise, is this a problem? I've read a few articles, but we all know we can't trust what we read. Is there signs that you have seen from the connections that you've made or the research you've done to say that we can anticipate a surge of resignations when the pandemic kind of ceases, really?
I suppose top line, my thought is no. It's unlikely across the board, although it might happen in some companies and some industries. I think that I suppose the chatter that we normally get around digital channels about everything to do with HR and recruitment, we love, a big happening, like everyone's going to be leaving, it's going to be fantastic. It's a little bit like Blue Monday. Every year, the first week in January, everybody thinks that everybody returns from Christmas to resign. And we know it's not true. It doesn't happen. So I think it will be a bit like that. Blue Monday. Play it in the background as you can't see me. I think there probably will be some movement because some people are going to look at where they are. Have they got the opportunity to learn, develop, grow, progress? Those are the key things people will be looking at. Do they have the opportunity to move around? I mean, a lot of the research I've done in recent months has been around internal mobility, internal talent marketplace. And, companies admit that they tend to look outside when there's a new role to fill. 2/3 of people say it's easier to find a job in another company than it is to move within the one they're with. So those kind of things need to be addressed. And I suppose what I'm seeing are companies looking at ways to address things like that internally. And I think people, the other part will be what kind of workplace will it be? How will hybrid work for people? Is it going to be an arrangement they want? Are they going to be forced back into an office more than they want? Those kind of factors might play with some attrition. But most of the research I've seen that doesn't kind of indicate that at some stage when the flag is waved saying, we've done it, guys, cases are low, the country's vaccinated, back to normal, that kind of, the hundreds of thousands of people are going to resign from their jobs.
Resignations tend to be have tended to be dependent also on opportunities elsewhere, haven't they? Because it's a privileged position to say see you later to a job when there's nothing there. You obviously have some resources to be able to make that decision. So perhaps this concept of a tsunami may be the wrong metaphor to think about, but it might be dependent on the availability of other things. So perhaps it spreads to those jobs that have always been in high demand. We can expect those people to be much more confident if the proposition that the employer is now offering, their current employer is now offering, is not substantially better than what they could get elsewhere, then that they could easily make that shift, particularly if there is a retention of this flexibility that people seem to be wanting to retain. Let's go to your situation, Mel, if I could. In fact, Mel and Liz, because you kind of, even though you're in a different roles, but you're both working internally in a people function. So you might have got a little bit of a feeling as to what the sense is within your own businesses. So let's look at it from that point of view. What are your thoughts on that? Is it a concern? Has it been spoken about, for instance, in your businesses?
I'll go first, if that's okay, Liz. So I think that there are two ways that I can help people to look at it, and I don't quite think it's a tsunami, Hung. I think it's if you look at last year, the number of permanent vacancies that recruitment agencies were dealing with, and those were going down, right? So recruitment perm hiring fell off a cliff. People weren't moving. There was uncertainty about future prospects around careers. And all of a sudden this year, people have seen a spike in the number of perm hires, right? So, and that's happened to us. You know, we've had direct approaches from lots of other businesses that last year went through furlough and redundancies and cut too close to the bone, I imagine, in some parts, and now are trying to build up those teams. So there's this massive competition for the same talent. And I think you're right, Hung. I think it's around that high in-demand talent that we were talking about, you know. So I think that's still a challenge. I think the organizations are panicking because of the language and because of the narrative externally about this tsunami. So they're counter offering at ridiculous salary levels. And I think from an organizational level, we've experienced losses because people have done I've spent a year at home. I feel like COVID and the vaccine is starting to give me some insight into actually the world's going to go back to a more normal place and I need a clean start. So nothing to do with the organization necessarily, but I want to put that behind me. And to do that, I think I want to go to another organization, right? And that's also what we've had kind of on reverse when we're talking to colleagues that are joining our organization. So I personally think there will be an increase. There's already an increase in permanent hiring happening, but that is because there hasn't really been any, because people were, much more cautious, taking more interims, more contractors. So I think that's created a difference.
So it basically could be explained through, it's like a backlog of normal hiring behavior that was put on hold effectively, and there's going to be a little bit of a surge because of that. The backlog is there, and you mentioned this period of time. Rich and I actually chatted about this really just before we came on air. That it has given us like forced time to reflect, hasn't it? So that the things that might have just not been perfect in your own life or in your own circumstances, but you didn't have time to really think it through because you're operationally in the middle of it. Suddenly we've all had a little bit more space to think about it, and maybe now bigger decisions need to be made, and perhaps we're waiting for something to happen to trigger it. I guess the reason why there might be a little bit of a surge is because there is a trigger point, isn't there? Like right now, it's like if it's as it is, then you can continue to drift. Even if you're kind of semi-dissatisfied, you don't need to make a radical decision yet. But when it comes down to it and the boss says, look, we need you back 9 to 5, 5 days a week, that's a big decision. In which case you might then decide, okay, that's when I'm going to do it. Go ahead.
Yeah, and it's a perfect storm, right? So if you think about, if I take our recruiting business, nobody was really hiring last year, and now everybody's hiring and rebuilding because the market is picking up. So everybody is competing for the same talent. So actually, lots of people are being approached, and the more that happens, the more that also gets you thinking, actually, is another organization the right decision? Should I be thinking about things differently? So I think it just, all of these things together, and the fact that you have more free time, right? So you're not commuting, you're not working long hours, you've got this kind of work-life integration in a different way. Or you might have felt like you're always on, because actually that's one of the other things that people are talking about, working at home all the time. Your laptop's always open, or it's in the kitchen or something. All of these things kind of add to it.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Liz, I want to go to you particularly on this idea of anxiety of coming back to the office. I've read this also, and I do get the sense, even though there was never an office for me to go to, but I do get the sense I've become like super comfortable in the circumstances that I've set up for myself. And the idea of even thinking of getting onto a tube or something, it's not like straightforward for me, like mentally not straightforward for me to think about. I've got to calculate all of this. What's your thoughts on that? I mean, do you think there's a degree of like a mental health challenge to getting people to go back to the office, and that may trigger a bunch of resignations?
I think definitely. So I heard the other day that we now have FORTO, which is fear of returning to the office. Come
again, Liz, repeat that again to us.
FORTO, fear of returning to office.
Love it.
And so I do think that, so I think what we have to remember is that everyone's has even though we're all been so separated, we all have very individual experiences during this time. Everyone's going to have different anxieties. So we've got some people that can't wait to get back in. Other employees that are they are anxious, but for different reasons. It might not just be commuting. It's like, gosh, how do I just plan things like childcare? Just organizing finances in terms of, I had my season ticket loan, now I don't. And this is a lot to think about. What we've done as a business is that since June, we've been planning for this. And we put a line in the sand there and then and said, we're moving to a hybrid. So we've created an environment where we allow everyone to work from the office or from home, depending on how they're feeling during that period of time, because it will change depending on individual circumstances, but depending on when you have the vaccine, what's going on in your world. So it's kind of like creating that individual personalized experience en masse, really. But we're in quite a unique position because we've hired 60% of our workforce during COVID. So yeah, we've been pretty busy. So everyone's kind of quite new and bouncing off the walls.
You know what? That's actually a hugely relevant point as well, Liz. What is the composition of your workforce that you hired pre-COVID, during COVID, and kind of post? Because presumably all of them will have very different experiences as a result of that, right?
Yeah.
And that also might have an impact as to what happens when there is a phase shift to the way in which you're working. Fear of returning to the office. Photo. Sophie in the chat stream said 100% this. Anybody else, folks? Do you have a fear of returning to the office, or are you embracing it? I'd love to get your comments on this. What are your thoughts? Give me some sort of idea what you're feeling on this. Oh, by the way, for people who are in the chat stream, if you want to ask our guests any questions, please ask them and ask a question section at the bottom of the screen. Okay, let's talk about the mitigation sort of strategies we might put into place, as well as thinking whether the mitigation is the right thing to do. Because okay, maybe you shouldn't keep people that want to leave. What are your thoughts on that? We talk about retention as a crisis, but is it not also sometimes, a cynical hat on, an opportunity to retool the business if you've decided to go down this type of method of working? For instance, bunch of people are not satisfied with this method of working, rather than try and wrestle them into this path that you've gone, you kind of let them go, so to speak, and say, okay, it's fine, we're going to just retool this way. Maybe that's one method to change things. Thoughts on this? Viable thing to try, or do we have an obligation to try and retain people? Feel free to get your thoughts in as well, Rich, on this.
I think we should, personally, I think we should retain, and I also don't think there is a one size fits all, but it's kind of getting that, which is why when Rich, you were talking about the HBR article, I think that's brilliant. I loved the piece in it about personas and thinking about how do you help people to do a diagnostic on what works for them. So, and that's all about their kind of living conditions versus the need to connect and the need to create innovation. My biggest fear, I think, is, and this is probably flipping it slightly, Liz, you've brought in 60% of your people during, and I joined during lockdown. I joined Harvey Nash Group in August last year. Is how are you creating that kind of stickiness to make them, feel like they're connected to your organization so that they want to stay? So I think definitely retain, but thinking about a model within reason, right, that works for people.
Do we change the retention strategy based on when we hired that person? So, for instance, pre-COVID, I've hired this person. Suddenly, they've had to go remote. I now identify that person as a red flag, big risk, because we're going to ask them to come back, and it's all weird. Or can we kind of put a yellow flag against people we hired during the remote period because, you know what, there's no big change for those folks? Thoughts on this?
So,
ladies first. Over to you, Liz.
I think that it yet again goes back to that creating the best of both worlds. So where people feel most comfortable. I think that what is really important to do is, so we've been through, so for people that were with the business before COVID, obviously it was like a real shock to them, all these new people coming in, a lot of change. So we ran a program in November called Future V Sessions, which is essentially enabling our people to understand what working in a hybrid workplace meant. So, going to asynchronous communication, how to be aware of their own mental well-being, how to give them the right tools, bringing everyone together, to connect, to meet each other. I think that from our point of view, if you get things right, if you provide people with opportunities, learning and development, and you're also qualifying, that recruitment process is right, so they're aligned to your values. You can't really do much more in terms of retention. If people want to go, that's something that's, I think, like emotional. They've kind of like checks out. So it's almost better, like, let them go, let them go with a smile on their face. And, invest. I think you have to invest in the right culture and the right infrastructure now, as a business. And that will, retain the right people.
Yeah, I mean, look, for my two penneth worth, I think there are a couple of things here. Whatever you do, you're going to make some people happy. You're going to make some people unhappy. That's life. You can't please everybody all of the time. I think what you'll see on the chat bar is, I think what a lot of people are saying, and where I wholeheartedly agree with, is you need to give your people a voice. So one thing that I would say has been a real benefit from COVID, apart from I hate being on team calls all the time, I communicate with people in the organisation far more regularly than perhaps I would have done when I was traveling to different offices and doing things. It's given me more accessibility to my team, and my team more accessibility to me. So I think whatever decision that we take as leaders around what that process is to be, the best way to move forward is to engage with your teams and ask them. You've got to be clear and say that, we're not going to do every single thing that you ask. But if you can engage and you can say to them that we listen to what you've said, we're going to do these things for this reason. We love the idea of this, but we can't do this now, but we'll consider it for later. You get that. It's basic. It doesn't matter whether you've had COVID or not. It's just basic engagement techniques, which is giving your people a voice, making them feel that they've got some skin in the game, that they feel part of it. And I think if you can do that, you'll keep the majority of people. There'll be people that want to go, and they're going to go regardless of what you do. But you've got to get those people on the fringes that could be tempted away. And trust me, I'm making 13, 14 headhunt calls a day as the MD to try and bring people in. And that's just me. You look at that across the 48,000 other recruitment companies doing that for not only their own teams, but their clients. People are talking to your people. So if you're not, and you don't understand what they want, somebody else will take them away. It's that simple.
All right. That's a really great.
I think that as well, if I suppose can add one thing, the number one reason, all the research I've ever seen, the number one reason that people stay is if they got the opportunity to kind of learn, grow, progress, develop. They feel the company is investing in them and allowing them. When I did research recently, which there was a podcast that Hung featured a couple of weeks ago around internal mobility, it was, we found a lot of cases of people saying that, people leave to do jobs elsewhere they could have done if they'd stayed. But A, they didn't know that they wanted to stretch, and B, people in the organization that were hiring for a role didn't actually know that somebody else in the organization had the right skills to do that role. So I think as long as they can see an opportunity, that the company will invest in them, and this isn't just about their learning and development. This is engagement. This is recognition. It's a good place to work. They feel part of something. They feel engaged to it, and they feel that you're allowing them to develop and enabling them to develop. Then I think people will stay. There was some research Peter Capelli did in the US that was something about, he did this thing about, obviously, years and years ago in the post-war era, up to the 80s, you stayed by moving up an organization. That's how you grew career. And then we've got into the last 30, 40 years or so of the best people are the ones who are working for somebody else, and we've got to get them in. But there was something that it takes new people coming in almost like 3 years to get up to speed with the organization they're joining. And people who stay and move into a role, it can take them up to 7 years to earn the kind of salary that somebody would have got from coming in from the outside. So it's I think we have to look internally, and there's been a lot of talk, we know, about, you know, talent intelligence platforms, talent mobility. I think we need to look internally at the people we've got, and how we can enable them. And if we don't think we can, then I think we have to have the honest conversations with them.
You know what? There's some really good, great points here, and I want to deal with the internal mobility side, because I think that's maybe a key component of the things that we need to do as a business. But it's obviously going to help on the retention side, and obviously help on the recruiting side as well. So it looks like a projects are really something we should embrace. Rich, you mentioned something really important, which was if you're not speaking to your people, you better be aware that other companies are speaking to your people. So as managers, wow, that is like really something you need to bear in mind. Treat your existing employees as if someone else is headhunting them. You need to have the same conversations with them as if you were an internal headhunter. You know, are you satisfied with the work? Here's the pathway forward. The decision has been made. We're going to go to this mode of working. How does that sit with you? And try and get the genuine feeling, what they feel about that. Because you can't browbeat people into this. You need to listen to what they're telling you, and then if you can, build a plan to keep them in. So going on to Merv's point about internal mobility, do you have an internal mobility plan? Yes or no? And if you do, tell me what that is. And if you don't, tell me what are you going to do it? And this is no shame, by the way. This is just something I want to explore with companies because I think rewind back 3 years, even 2 years ago, no one was doing this to any significant degree. So we were all kind of like stepping forward on this. Internal mobility. Go to you, Mel, on this. Harvey Nash Group. Is there a plan around that?
It's at the very early stages, so there hasn't been a plan, not a clear plan, right? And I agree with some of the things that Merv is saying. I also, you know, one of the things that's really important to me is that topic that Merv is saying around pay. If you move people internally, you pay them the rate that you should pay them, not the rate, you know, not an increase on what they were currently on. What we're doing at the moment is creating more opportunity to give people exposure. So we're understanding the types of roles, the opportunities, the career paths. So we've built career paths, you know, not an unusual thing for organizations to do. But we've also put in place, in our recruiting business particularly, we've put in place a talent board, which is it's not filled with the senior leaders, it's filled with the level below, so that they can help to shape the activity that we are doing, and actually what do we need to do to help to start move people around. In a previous organization, we put some rules in around, you know, rules of engagement. So at which point do you start to have discussions with your line manager? How do you kind of have those confidential internal conversations? So we just create more of a conversation. And then I think the other thing that's really important is actually case studying more of this stuff internally, because if people see that it's happening, they see that it's acceptable to kind of have those conversations, then I think it makes it more of a normal occurrence. Because I remember, not in this organization, but I remember in a previous organization, somebody writing to me via LinkedIn because they didn't want to use their company email address to ask me about a job that we had. And because I was a bit like, oh my God, this is ridiculous, right? So I think managers, you know, there was a kind of comment around hiring managers and understanding that the talent in the organization is the organization's talent, not the hiring manager's talent, right? So, but that's an education.
Go on, Rich, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, back in a previous life when I worked down at Molson Coors, which was, you know, not necessarily perceived as the most forward-thinking organization, but one of the things they did is they targeted all of their managers. That they did quite a lot of 9-box grid where people sat, and if they sat in a certain position within that organization, within 2 years, it was the manager's responsibility to see them promoted or see them move to a different department to grow. and they had a real focus on it. And it was one of the only organisations that I've ever worked with that was so proactive. And for an organisation that was really backwards in a lot of other areas, in fairness, I mean, that sort of stuff was amazing. And you saw the business evolve, you saw it grow. It was fascinating.
Were you there when it was implemented, Rich, or did you kind of see it when it was already in place when you were there?
No, so we helped come up with some of the ideas because we were in a previous life in a different RPO business. But it was down to them, and it was really interesting to see it evolve. And what was really funny is it was sponsored at the board level, and we saw it work really, really well at the lower levels. But the board level, they just reverted to type every single time. It was fascinating, but it was really the general feel within the business when it was implemented was really positive, and you could feel people were talking about it. People could see that even if they weren't one of those people targeted, they could feel that there was an opportunity for develop, because if that person moved, there was an opportunity for somebody else. It wasn't always dead man's shoes. It was a fascinating time to be part of that business.
Yeah, so it basically creates, you talked about kind of these effects, compounding effects earlier, Mel, about if you start the internal mobility going, you just create a bit more labor liquidity internally, it actually just gets slicker and slicker. Yeah. And your retention should actually accelerate in terms of improving the rates of retention. But if you're like locked in a very structured, kind of rigid business and nobody's moving anywhere, the only way to move is to go out. Yeah. And that's where you're going to lose your staff, particularly if you've shocked them with a big phase shift in terms of coming back in. So it's probably something I want to touch on a little bit more because we've got some other ideas we want to tease out. So Liz, coming to you. Is there any planning around internal mobility in your business currently?
Yes, so we have, it's very new. We just started a program called Managers Lab. So we are upskilling all of our managers so that they can have the right conversations with their people. And we've also been working on, it's quite in its early phases, but also looking at actually how do you move through the organization without having to be a manager? So how can you be a subject matter expert so that people believe that there is that like long-term career for them at View without having to lead a team, because we have an awful lot of individuals that are brilliant at what they do and fantastic when it comes to a technology point of view. But sometimes people see the only way up is through leading a team, and actually that's not always right. You need those really deep subject matter experts across the business, and people need to see that there's two pathways for them. They don't necessarily have to lead a team to be progressed.
That might actually be a critical component for internal mobility, isn't it? To sort of provide non-management pathways for progression. Yeah. It doesn't have to be like, another thing about internal mobility is that we kind of always think it's going up or out. It's still this pyramidical view of how organizations are structured. But if you kind of make it okay for people to, go sideways or even down level, if you want to even use, maybe the entire terminology needs to change in terms of these directions, but there's no reason why they couldn't fulfill very important sort of roles in a different way of the business. And the main thing, I think, going back to Murph's point, hiring someone from outside in, you've got all kinds of enculturation time you've got to put in. There's like institutional knowledge that is missed. There's all kinds of ways in which the business really works. The stuff that isn't documented and isn't worked out. We all know this is true, especially the bigger the business, the more complex it is. There's certain ways in which that thing operates that isn't actually isn't overt. And you need to know how that operates, typically by being in the business.
And I think we'll see more of that actually post-pandemic. People actually maybe wanting to take a sideways step, or to have like compressed hours, or to like, because they're suddenly thinking, gosh, I want to spend more time outside of work. So giving them that flexibility, and you can move throughout the organization. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to like take on more responsibility.
Here's the thought experiment, Liz. You just mentioned something really interesting. Could the format of the business, remote, full on-premise, let's say some sort of hybrid, will that have an impact on internal mobility? Because You can imagine it should, right? I mean, as you talk about the flexibility, maybe you end up hiring more people doing less hours if you're super flexible business. Where if you're fully on premise, everyone's in the office, then obviously that's going to suit people that don't require or need the flexibility. Maybe they end up spending more time at work, so to speak, and you have less employees overall. Same amount of hours work, but less employees. Thoughts on this? Remote, hybrid, or on-premise, does that affect internal mobility?
Yes, because I think it's the learning as well, right? So if you've got, you're trying to bring people through the business, you're trying to educate them, train them. At the moment, the only way that you can do that is by dragging them to all your Zoom calls, because obviously they're not seeing you in action and they're not getting as much exposure. So I think that you've got to be really conscious about how you create those opportunities for people to learn and therefore to grow. I think that with on-site, I think it might, people could get stuck. I think it's definitely going to impact mobility.
I agree. I think there are a couple of things. I think your permanent on-site would really impact it, because actually, what if your talent? So let's even take a country, right? So you've got the UK, and you might have offices in Manchester, Glasgow, the London office, and historically that role has been London-based. The team is London-based. If you then have everything full office, you're losing all of that other talent. So actually, your internal mobility and the opportunity to give people options who might not be personally mobile but capable will affect it. Whereas kind of the hybrid you could live with, if you're saying actually you might need to do full team meet once a month or something, let's kind of do the travel. I do think, and this is probably a little side jump, Hung, so just manage me if you need to draw me back in. There's another way to kind of help people with career, I think, as well. I've just been watching some of this great content coming up in the chat, is that we just put in place a global mentoring program with the pure view of helping people to think about their career and talking to people outside of their current network, which in itself opens the business up, right? So we've matched people based on their desire to progress their career, and they're people all over the globe. And so you then start to create more opportunities to think about how do you model your offer, and how do you think about where you're placing roles. You know, some roles will always need to be regionally local, but others do they, right? But that needs the leaders. And I think that comes back to Rich, you were saying around the board and the exec not modeling the behaviors. All of the leaders have to model the behaviors that you expect. So they have to think differently. They have to be more flexible in their approach. They have to, be open to trying new things.
Yeah, completely agree with that.
What about all of this? I mean, I'm not a skeptic of mentoring. Whenever I've just probably set myself up to now say a skeptical thing, but I'll roll it out anyway. Because isn't it the case that how permanent is that mentor? How permanent is that coach? If it's just like a one-off training session, one-off coaching or whatever, I'm kind of putting the cynical hat on and saying, look, this is give me some tips. But is it really going to help sustainably create a more fluid organization? Doesn't that then require permanent coaches in the business? Their job is to literally do almost like professional services businesses have career managers, don't they?
No, I don't think so. Our coaching, it's not a coaching program. Our mentoring program is a 6-month program, and we're doing a new cohort every twice a year. And so actually you've got some longevity, but the way that I kind of think back to all of this is every time I've grown in my career and taking on something new, the reason I think that I've been successful in what I've done is because I've found a mentor, and that mentor that mentoring relationship might have been a kind of mentoring relationship for a 6-month period, but they've become somebody I know I can talk to and ask their advice. And so what you're creating is you're creating network and connection. And so you're taking somebody out of their internal network, maybe in the London office, or it may be you're actually broadening their network. So when they do want to think about career objectives, when they do want to think about what sort of things might they need to consider, they can pick up the phone and talk. If the mentoring relationship is a good mentoring relationship, right, you can pick up the phone and you can get advice on what that might look like. So I'm a huge fan, and I've used it repeatedly in my own career.
just as a final caveat on that, Mel, has that like an informal thing you've actually took upon yourself to try and identify these mentors? Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think that's the normal way to do it, isn't it, so far?
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see whether companies are able to systematize that and create something more consistent for everyone to potentially get access to. Okay, some final thoughts on this. Is hybrid, which is the way in which we're moving towards, it seems, as some sort of like a kind of settled middle way, so to speak, does that contain hidden problems with internal mobility? So, for instance, we want to be treating everyone the same, but I'm seeing Joe in the office every day, and you know what? I reckon he's really talented because I've seen him every day. He should go in this direction. I don't see Liz because she's like remote. Slack's fine, but I've never met her. I mean, aren't we kind of potentially advantaging, if that's the word, the person who you have closer proximity to?
I'd like to jump in if I may.
Go ahead, Murph.
I did some research about 3 years ago, and it was 14,000 job seekers around Europe. And there were some questions then about kind of working from home, working remotely. And the finding was, it was interesting because some kind of wanted to work from home so they could manage their work-life balance. Other people wanted to be in an office because they wanted to keep work and home separate. But the thing that they came together on was this visibility thing. And people strongly felt that if they weren't physically in an office, they weren't visible to leaders, managers, and they get looked over for assignments, for promotions and stuff. And so that visibility is hugely important. And we all know, we've all been in offices, and there are people who maybe work from home a few days a week. And I had a situation for 3 years I worked where I was based in a different town to the rest of my team, and it's only the one day a week we all got together that I felt part of that team. The rest of the time I didn't feel part of that team, not because they didn't make me feel part of it, but because I was away from them. So I think that it's important, if we're talking about this, to remember that too many people go for visibility. They rely on the people they know, they rely on the faces they see all the time. And you know what, I want this done, I want this project done, I know I can rely on Chris because he did the last one, that's a management issue. And I suppose it's to do with how we hire managers, how we reward managers. I was having in the thread with Tracy Parsons in the US, hello Tracy, about rewarding managers for producing talent, not for hoarding it, by just having all the high performers in their team. And I think that it is important, and this is what some people will be worried about with hybrid, that the times they're working from home, they're not visible.
What do we do about it? Go ahead, Rich.
I kind of agree, but I kind of disagree. So
all right, you see, you disagree, Rich.
Because I do. I agree. I genuinely agree around the whole point around visibility, and I think that that's true. And I can certainly say that when I and I'll say this quite openly, when I joined AMS, my career accelerated when I moved into a head office role, because I was suddenly with all of the chief people in that organisation, and my career rocketed. Brilliant. But there are other people that were equally, if not more talented than me, that didn't. Where I think COVID and technology like this is helping is moving away from the word like visibility and talk about collaboration. And where I think we're getting it really, really right at Kelly is we're asking people to collaborate together, whether they're in the same location. So a bit like we were talking about some of this stuff we're talking around mentoring. It's kind of like mentoring, but it's informal. It's kind of get together, collaboration. Here's a task. Who's interested? Collaborate. And forcing people to get into that position creates opportunity for people. And I think that's really important. So, yes, I agree about visibility. I can't disagree with that. But I think there's a lot that we can do to change the way that we give people collaboration, to be more collaborative in what they're doing, to approach a task. That in itself changes your culture and gives you much more opportunity.
So we need to sort of change how work is allocated. In other words, projects, juicy clients. You remember all that type of stuff back in the agency days? It's like you're sitting next to the boss, it's like the best seat, because you're just going to get it thrown at you. But we've got to change that. We have to have a different way of getting the work to the person can't be based on physical proximity. Mel, you're going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to add to the piece around collaboration, actually. I think, one of the good things that came out of the last year is the fact that people collaborate more across regions. They collaborate more across different office locations. So actually, proximity to your line manager makes no difference in some of those things now, because actually what it's enabled us to do is to open up the talent pool to say we've got a project that we're working on that historically you might have kept to a location, and now you're just using talent rather than, and that's giving them more exposure. So, you are raising the profile, because it's a bit like being in the office for you, Rich. Now, being on those project calls, because everybody's in different locations, is giving you that exposure. So,
absolutely.
It's a real balance, but collaboration is definitely a big thing and a big part of it.
And focusing on outputs.
I totally agree. Totally agree.
Getting really clear in terms of like, what do you need to deliver in this role? It's not about where you are. It's like, what are you doing? And having that like very upfront.
I want to raise Raveen's very important point. All this is well and good, and I agree with what everyone said, but there's going to be these serendipitous meetings with the boss or whatever, or some influencer internally that actually might be decisive, or at least traditionally has been decisive, been super important, hasn't it? This is why, golfing with your boss back in the day was like an important thing for your career, actually. Or, being able to make a nice cup of coffee, all those small, like ridiculous things have a disproportionate impact.
Like this, damn it, I knew there was something that went wrong.
Yeah, your tea making is terrible. Mel, sort it out. No, so how do we deal with this? Do we accept, for instance, that the in-office on-premise are always going to have a slight advantage, unintentional or otherwise? Or do we really discipline ourselves to say, look, you simply can't pass on projects unless it goes through this route? So I think a lot of businesses that have been remote have tried to force it. There's like one channel where requisitions happen. Anything else is not actually accepted unless it goes here. So is that the way to solve this problem?
No, I don't. I think it's a really interesting conversation, because I've been going back into the office 1 or 2 days a week, because there's kind of like half a dozen people in there, so there's nobody in there really. But I like the kind of being around people. I think I have more conversations around what we're doing from a project perspective on all of these calls where there are more people. Will that change when more people are in the office? Possibly, but I do think, and I'm saying this with hope, that actually people are so used to working using the channels and using the Teams chat and using the kind of way that they do their huddles and everything else now, that there's a kind of format set up.
We've learnt it, basically.
It's become a habit.
Yeah,
it's become a habit.
Cool. That's really progressive. Go ahead, Liz.
We're mindful as well of being more inclusive, right? So I think that there will be less of a kind of like, because you're present or because you hang out at the water cooler, and that you'll get all the opportunities. I think people will be called out on that.
Damn it, Hung Lee's career growth strategy has been ruined by COVID. I was really good at that. My tea making, top notch.
You hung up by bars though, Hung. Let's be fair, it was never a tea or a water cooler.
And I can't play golf, so I was my ceiling reached. No, but this is really interesting, especially as I think you're right. We've changed the way in which we communicate, and that hopefully will change the way in which we move our careers forward. Folks, we're coming to the end of the show. I just want to make sure everyone has a final comment to make on the original point, which was, okay, is there a mitigation you can implement today in order to make sure that you don't get more than the resignations than you could potentially avoid? Let's go to you first, Rich, with this one.
Give your people a voice. That's my pearl of wisdom.
Cool. Get them, talk to them, get them to talk to you. They need to contribute to the future of the business. Okay, how about you, Mel?
Same for me. And I think there was something in the chat earlier on that was kind of like, how do you do that at scale? I think it's you use lots of different channels, right? So use engagement surveys, speak to your colleagues, but also if they do resign, because I know you were talking about this, Liz, about just letting people go, find out why. If you can't turn them around, what can you take from that to change? If, there is a change.
Absolutely. And maybe even help them move on. I mean, sometimes preserving the relationship. Bill Borman, our friend, is very good at thinking along these lines. Like, hey, don't try and retain the employee, retain the relationship. You never know. This is a new world. This person might be coming back to you in some fashion. Oftentimes, how they exit is going to be a big part of that, whether they're interested in returning. Okay, go to you, Liz.
Invest in your managers, because I believe that people leave managers, not jobs.
100%. We're not equipped, are we? Managers were always underinvested. They literally, this is a new world for them, and there's no reason to expect they know everything about it. So we need to put effort in there. Okay, disembodied Merv. Final word to you, sir.
I suppose my final point would be internal mobility. The opportunities that we offer people within the broader organisation has always, I think, been seen as a talent management issue. It's something HR get involved with, L&D, usually at the time when someone's thinking of leaving. It's not. It's a talent acquisition issue. It's how we upskill the companies, how we ensure we have the skills, the knowledge, the capabilities across the organisation that the organisation needs. And that means getting talent acquisition on board with it just as much as any other part.
Absolutely. I think it's essential for TA to get not only heavily involved in IM, internal mobility, but to really take ownership of it, because we have to think of ourselves as like a multidisciplinary talent delivery function. It's not about acquiring talent from external in. That talent could be anywhere internally already in. So we need to do this. Otherwise, our role, I think, will get smaller and smaller, and nobody wants that. Okay, that's about it. Thank you for joining us, everybody. Really great having you on the show. Time to say goodbye, I think. So goodbye, Merv. I'll see you soon, sir. Thank you very much, Mel. We'll have to say goodbye to you as well. And goodbye, Liz. Great to see you. And finally, nearly goodbye to you, Rich. I thought that was a really good show. I don't know whether you thought the same.
Loved it.
Really good conversation. Lots more to be had and lots of learning as well. I need to pay someone to write the notes on this show, because there's lots of learnings here. Particularly the idea that you need to treat your employees as other companies are treating them. You've got to be really smart on that. Okay, final thing, folks. If you've enjoyed this show, please make sure you follow the channel. We do this every Friday. We're back next week with a can't miss show. This is LinkedIn Updates. We're going to do one of these every quarter. Our special guest is Andy Foote. He's the person that knows more about LinkedIn than anybody else, in my opinion. He's going to come and join us from Canada. He's going to give us a breakdown as to what's happened on LinkedIn in Q2 and what we need to do as individuals in order to make massive advantage of it. Make sure you sign up to that. And we'll see you next week. So have a good afternoon, folks. Have a good weekend.
Take care. Thanks for having us on.
Cool. Good show. Hey, folks. All right. Time to have a good weekend, everybody. I'm going to have a few beers. This is why I have Brainfood live on 12 to 1, by the way, so I can kind of finish early. All right. I'll see you later.